Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of Chapter 9 on meditation methods and contemplations in the context of the lecture series True Dhamma, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. My name is Dr. Florian Lau from the Dhamma Hub, and today we will continue where we left off last time. In the last part of this lecture or this chapter, we discussed methods as a replacement for virtue and had the ninth story time where we had a in-depth view on the Buddha's Parinibbana or final Nibbana, or to use conventional words, on the Buddha's death, even though the Buddha never used the word death, as it does not apply to an arahant anymore. Then we had a discussion on the environment, on the optimal environment for beginners when it comes to meditation, and then a discussion on the optimal time for beginners. Even though time and environment should not matter too much in the grand scheme of things, for beginners they do matter. Because in the beginning it can be very difficult, especially for the generation that has grown up with the internet, because our attention span suffered a lot, simply due to that fact. Then we discussed a few modern methods, namely some breathing meditation to generate calm and neutral feelings, and some labeling or noting meditation with a very similar purpose. Both can also serve as a foundation for insight if you do them rightly. But in that case, you have to rewire the methods, as I have displayed them, to be more closer to what the Buddha actually presented when it comes to mindfulness of breathing or any type of mindfulness. And today we will continue with a different method, namely with walking meditation. But before we do that, we do 5 minutes of non-reactivity as always. So if you want to understand the content of this lecture better, and not through your craving, but without your craving, then I invite you to do 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation or emotional non-reactivity. Just pause the video right now and continue in 5 minutes. And whatever you do, try to not act out of greed, aversion, or delusion, or distraction, however you want to phrase it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And also make sure that those not acting applies in body, speech, and mind, and not just bodily or verbal actions, also mental actions. I will pause now for a moment, and then we continue with the content of this lecture. Okay, now we continue where we left off with the section on walking meditation. Walking meditation is one of those things that the Buddha actually frequently taught, but that is nearly forgotten nowadays. He, however, never taught things that were without benefit, and walking meditation indeed is a very pragmatic thing that you can do, even as a spiritual practitioner. And I think it is mainly overlooked because of the absorption meditation myths that are going around everywhere, where you want to achieve a state where you are just absorbed in one object and feel quite good due to ignoring everything else. And that can obviously not happen during walking meditation, which is why the commentaries on the Pali Canon always try to rationalize those walking meditation suttas away, because the Buddha very directly names that you can attain the jhanas during walking meditation, but you obviously cannot attain any type of absorption while walking. So they have to do some mental acrobatics to make it match their view on the jhanas. However, what walking meditation also does as a byproduct is it serves as a good basis for health and a good digestion. The human body simply has to move for a good digestion. So walking meditation fulfills that purpose. Because even at the time of the Buddha, a lot of monks were sitting too much, and as a result their health was suffering. And when your health is suffering, spiritual striving is kind of difficult. But one of the most important things when it comes to walking meditation is that it is boring enough for contemplation, yet walking is an intentional act. And if you want to see through the nature of all intentional activities, then you must do that on the basis of an intentional activity, which is very important to keep in mind. And all you have to do is pretty much notice the things that also happen while you are walking. So in a sense, you can use that as an anchor point for your mindfulness and then contemplate in the background or try to discern or develop discernment. And it's a bit harder to get distracted while walking, and it also arouses more energy. So when you are tired, it might be a good idea to start doing walking meditation instead of sitting meditation if you have trouble with falling asleep, as an example. And there are many additional benefits when it comes to walking meditation. But keep in mind that the Buddha never taught specific walking meditation methods as we teach them nowadays, or as many retreat centers, as an example, teach them nowadays. He basically just suggested to do mindful walking. and that is enough. He never went into more details. The details are something that you can actually decide for yourself, so they do not matter too much. What matters is a foundation that you are mindful while walking. The actual walking pattern or anything like that is not of too much interest. And now we have a short citation that we also had at a prior point, but again, I cannot guarantee that everyone is watching all the parts of this lecture. So when there is something important, I want to repeat it here. So when the Buddha talked about walking meditation, he did praise it for 5 benefits. And what 5? One becomes capable of journeys. One becomes capable of striving. One becomes healthy. What one has eaten, drunk, consumed, and tasted is properly digested, and the concentration attained through walking meditation is long-lasting. These are the 5 benefits of walking meditation from the Anguttara Nikaya Book of the Fives, Sutta number 29. You can scan the QR code if you wish to see that sutta in more detail. And what the Buddha essentially says here is that walking meditation is a kind of exercise. It helps you stay in shape, and that is important for wandering monks, because they move from place to place, or at the time of the Buddha they did, to teach the Dhamma. And even nowadays it cannot be avoided. Some travel will always be part of your life, and it is much better to be physically prepared for such things. And it also serves as a great basis to cultivate the necessary discipline and endurance for striving, for spiritual striving. It is a very hard thing to do, or it can be. In fact, the Buddha even called it the hardest thing that you can ever do. And then it also serves as a good basis for health and for your digestion. All those things are pretty much based on your blood circulation, as that transports the nutrients throughout the body and the garbage out of your body. And the circulation is simply stimulated by moving a lot, because that is how the human body evolutionarily worked. Because when you move faster, then your heartbeat accelerates, and the blood is pumped more efficiently throughout our system. And the last benefit is that the concentration through walking meditation, or the samadhi, the collectedness, the gathering of your mind of all the factors of awakening, is long-lasting, because it is more difficult to attain. And when it is more difficult to attain, then it also lasts longer, because it is less subject to distraction. And thus, if you attain concentration during walking, then it is of great benefit for you. Okay, but walking can also be turned into a method, as it is done nowadays. Walking meditation does not have to be like normal walking, by the way, if you follow such a method and split up the walking into different phases. And it can feel strange at first, but that is just something that you can use as an object for enduring. And that type of walking that I'm about to present is sufficiently different to induce a kind of novelty mindfulness. Because whenever you do something for the first time, you will pretty much automatically be mindful. And it's good to start with a simple pattern and then gradually ease into the 6-phase walking scheme that is now often taught. And the goal is to maintain mindfulness without any method. But you have to ease into that so that you can be mindful whenever you walk in day-to-day life. And yeah, this is pretty much the goal. You want to be mindful while doing any kind of walking, because walking is a very basic activity that a considerable part of our day is filled with. And that type of walking meditation produces mindfulness in the form of carryover in everyday life, simply because that walking is very similar to what we do in everyday life. And during that style of walking meditation, you want to apply your mind, your attention, to the soles of your feet. And this is also very important, it is basically just as good as sitting meditation when it comes to developing mindfulness and discernment. The only thing that you cannot do during walking meditation is be absorbed, but we don't want to be absorbed anyway, as I hopefully have made very clear during the course of this lecture. And if you want to do that and try that for yourself, using the method that is now often taught, you can do it as in this picture series. In step 1, you want to start with your feet, with your one foot slightly in front of the other foot. Then you lift the heel of the foot that has been left behind. Then you lift up the entire foot. Then you move it forward. Then you lower the front of your foot. Then you place the front of your foot on the floor. And then you lower your heel. And then you essentially repeat the entire process. This is all there is. You choose a straight walking line because, well, straight lines are just very pragmatic. Then you can just walk back and forth and be done with it. So it may not be the most popular popular style of meditation, but it's very, very helpful nonetheless, simply because of all the benefits that the Buddha named. And many people in the suttas or in the Theragatha attained final knowledge during walking meditation. So it is by all means very possible to generate insight during so. It is not limited to sitting on the meditation cushion at all. In fact, you don't have to sit at all. It is a knowledge, and the knowledge is not dependent on some kind of bodily posture. So all you have to do pretty much to perform this method is to choose a straight walking path in some secluded environment. All the environmental factors are pretty much the same as with sitting meditation. So you want to be secluded and all the other things. And then you just walk back and forth. And then anchor your mindfulness somewhere and then discern what is also going on. Again, the goal is always the same. You want to discern or you want to develop the right view, the discernment of dependent origination. And based on that, you can do that. Over time, you don't have to be sticking to the 6-phase walking scheme that I present here. It is just the most popular one nowadays, and I just want to teach it so that people can do it if they wish to, or if they choose to. It is by no means mandatory to do that, by the way. It is just one method of walking out of many. You can also just walk back and forth with normal speed. It can help to be a bit slower, simply because it is different from normal walking, and then the mental automatism, the mental reactivity, will not kick in as fast as normally. So when you move about 20% slower than normal, then it's easier to maintain your mindfulness, as the activity is more different from what you normally do. And all those things that you normally do have very strong reactivity, so you should avoid that. And now we come to one of the probably most popular meditation methods nowadays, Metta Meditation. And it might even be the most popular of all contemporary methods. And Metta is a word from the Pali language, and the opposite, or the way the Buddha phrased it most often, is non-ill will. Metta is the cultivation of non-ill will. And to make it a bit more tangible, you could think of metta as cultivating an attitude of friendliness or goodwill towards all people and all things in the entire world. And you can think of it as the difference between treating a stranger and treating a friend, a very good friend, maybe even your best friend. And the goal is to make the entire world your best friend. And if your best friend misbehaves, then you are very generous towards him, and you have no trouble to look over the mistakes that person made. But when a stranger does that, it typically enrages us, and we are very upset with the behavior of such a person. But if we have cultivated the frame of reference of friendliness or goodness towards all people, then such a behavior cannot arise in us. And this is essentially the goal of cultivating metta, or any of the Brahma Viharas really. And the Brahma Viharas are divine abodes, and without the right view, they will lead to a rebirth in heaven, namely in the Brahma world. It is named after the Brahma Viharas. And those states can already feel divine, even without the right view. And they are characterized by the temporary absence of ill will, or cruelty, or discontentment, or aversion. So it is characterized, at least in the most mature state, by the absence of craving. When there is no aversion to experience as it is right now, then everything is fine, and there is no real craving involved. And metta meditation develops a virtue if you do it right. It develops non-reactivity. So it's more based on the level of feeling and emotion than on the level of the body compared to jhana. And it won't lead to liberation without the right view, but is a very fertile ground for insight if you do it rightly. But this is also very important. You don't want to use any method of meditation as a cope. And I can only repeat that over and over again, because many people meditate, even if liberation is their final goal, meditate to get rid of arisen suffering. And this is the one thing that you cannot do that will lead you very far away from liberation of mind, because you want to learn to be at ease no matter what the circumstances are. And to give you an idea about the look and feel of the Brahma Viharas, I give you a short simile. Suppose there were a pond with clear, agreeable, cool water, transparent, with a smooth bank, delightful. If a man, scorched and exhausted by hot weather, very parched and thirsty, came from the east or from the west or from the north or from the south or from where you will, Having come upon the pond, he would quench his thirst and his hot weather fever. So too, monk, if anyone from a clan of nobles goes forth from the home life into homelessness, and after encountering the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by the Tathagata, by the Buddha, develops loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, or equanimity, and thereby gains inner peace, then, because of that internal peace, he practices the way that is proper to the recluse, I say. So you can compare it with the relief of an exhausted traveler that finds an oasis in the desert. This is a type of feeling that the Brahmaviharas will generate if you do them rightly. And this is from Majjhima Nikaya number 40, if you want to read it up yourself. And the sutta is often quoted to convey the look and feel of the jhanas while it talks about the Brahmaviharas. If you look at the sutta, I think the Visuddhimagga is a very popular book, even misquotes that. And when it comes to the actual doing of the Metta meditation, when it comes to the Buddha, he mainly described it as follows. Here, I collect some grass or leaves that I find into a pile and then sit down. Having folded my legs crosswise and straightened my body, I bring mindfulness to the fourth. Then I dwell pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness, likewise the second, the third, and the fourth quarter, thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to myself. I dwell pervading the entire world of the senses with a mind imbued with loving kindness, vast, exalted, measureless, without enmity, without ill will. This is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Threes, number 63. Again, you can read it up for yourself. But as you can see, the Buddha never explained metta meditation in terms of repeating certain verses or certain things in your meditation. What he suggested is just to purify your mind from all ill will. And that is all. The entire world of the senses should not contain anything that we feel ill will towards. And we cultivate that state, and as a result, we dwell in a state of non-ill will and cultivate metta, the attitude of goodness towards all beings. And this is a very fruitful practice, but it is kind of difficult to do, because most people opt in for the easier way, to just repeat some healing phrases and not look for all the aversion that they are carrying in themselves, not looking for all the ill will that is in the mind. They try to avoid that. So whenever you do guided metta meditation with other people, they usually hate the parts where I try to direct their attitude of goodwill towards people that they dislike. And then there is all kinds of ill will and aversion arising in themselves. And they do not like that. It is completely understandable that they do not like that. But that is a part where you train yourself. You like to overcome that ill will of yours. You like to purify your mind of that ill will. And if you use such meditations to do exactly that, then also some of the modern kinds of metta meditation can yield great benefit, by the way. But you have to do it with the right goal. And the original metta goes as follows. The Buddha never recited verses. He advised us to scan the mind for ill will and look in all directions, everything that is possibly part of our experience. And he repeated those instructions, by the way, for all of the Brahmaviharas, not just for metta, also for compassion and appreciative joy and equanimity. And the opposite of ill will is not love. This is very important. People often translate it as that, but the translation for the word love has so many different meanings. And most people think of love as the affective kind of love, where you prefer one person over the entire world. And that is not the love that the Buddha is talking about. The opposite of love is non-love, and the opposite of ill will is non-ill will. So metta is non-ill will, and it is much better to view it as an attitude of goodwill or intense friendliness for all beings than with the actual kind of love that most people conventionally talk about. And this is basically a basic propositional logic, by the way. And the Buddha was a very logical person. And all the Brahmaviharas pretty much describe the absence of certain types of aversion in your experience. And metta usually comes first, as the others are more subtle. But ultimately, they all result in non-aversion or equanimity, which is what we try to achieve. And when you want a metta method, then you can do the following. Here is a contemporary scheme pretty much for metta. First, you want to try to generate some feeling of goodness or friendliness towards your pets or another easy target. The book Visuddhimagga, for example, suggests that we start with a person that might even be crippled or ill, where it is pretty much impossible not to feel some kind of compassion. then you want to move to yourself, then to your friends and families, then to neutral people, then to difficult people, then to enemies, and then to yourself again. So as you can see, it is a gradual scheme that makes it more and more difficult. You want to start where it is easy, and then you want to move to more and more difficult targets. But again, the objective of this kind of scheme is to see your ill will and then overcome it. You do not want to replace it by the method. You want to notice that it is there, and then you want to, treat it with indifference. Let's put it like that. You want to overcome it. And this is not done by replacing it. This is very important. It is done by understanding it, by letting it endure in the mind, and by letting it vanish on its own. Because it can only be there when you feed it and welcome it and entertain it. And you want to do none of those things. And this kind of metta meditation is usually not done in that way when most people perform it. But it is still much better than picking up sticks and stone and, hitting other people with them. But it is not yet Dhamma. The Dhamma literally starts with stream entry, with the attainment of the right view. Before that, everything is virtue and cope, more or less, because that is the only way people know before stream entry to deal with arisen suffering. But again, if you use it rightly, it can be a very fruitful practice. But you really have to make an effort not to fall into the easier schemes that just replace the bad feeling. You want to understand what there is, you want to weaken your craving, and that requires the presence of such things. And then you want to make sure that you do not welcome, do not entertain, do not delight in those things. And the last part, when it comes to the modern methods I want to discuss, is everyday mindfulness. You don't want to be just mindful when you are on the meditation cushion. This is the initial training that should carry over into everyday life, which is very important. You have to actively transfer mindfulness in most cases into your everyday life. Just walking meditation is the very first step. And then you want to make, for example, a habit out of doing mindful chores and cultivate mindfulness of the body while doing that. This is just one example out of many. Many people can come up with different things that makes it easier for them to transfer that skill into everyday life. And you want to progressively increase the difficulty, and it can even help to modularize any task that you do or any activity that you do into chunks to decondition the automaticity that is usually there. It can also help to do whatever activity you do, even speaking, about 20% slower. And that will probably go unnoticed by most people, but it can really help you to cultivate mindfulness. And as you want to make it a habit, each new chore should take about 60 to 200 days until you are habitually mindful while doing it. And again, Dhamma is a way of living. And overall, all of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, namely body, feeling, mood, and thought, are suitable everyday anchor points or points of reference for your mindfulness, as they endure pretty much throughout all context changes and are suitable for cultivating continuous mindfulness. So if your mindfulness lapses, there's a very good chance that either your craving is very strong or the reference point for your mindfulness is too changing. So you really want to use one of the foundations that endure throughout all things, that must always be there. Okay, but now we come to the very important point of reflecting methods, which is something that is incredibly important, because you do not want to be stuck with one method and repeat it all your life. Methods have to be frequently changed so that there is benefit to them. And when it comes to the right choice of method, here is what you should do. It is very important to choose a method that is designed to tackle a current problem of yours. So when you have no idea what you should do, then sense restraint and enduring should be the default mode of practice in the presence of good and bad feelings. So when there is craving, then you endure that craving and endure the bad emotions or feelings that arise from that. When there is, for example, a neutral feeling and you are quite calm, then contemplation and trying to understand is what you should do. It's pretty much always possible to do that, and it is really supported by studying the suttas and trying to understand, reading a lot, watching lectures like this, watching Dhamma talks online. And apart from that, you can also perform mindfulness meditation methods on the cushion to generate some calm so that you are more inclined to actually being able to contemplate, just so the mind is in a state where it does not misconceive through craving, as an example. When there is, for example, a lot of ill will or self-criticism in you, then it might be very beneficial to perform metta meditation. That will be your specific problem in that case. And when you are very lazy or sleepy or in a state of torpor, then you want to perform walking meditation, or simply as an alternative to sitting meditation, because we cannot sit all day. When you are doing a longer retreat, then it is a good idea to switch between walking meditation and sitting meditation. And once you are able to do it, then jhana should be done at all times. So you can maintain jhana pretty much in every state that you want to. But it is quite difficult to even achieve that state initially. And when I talk about jhana here, just to make sure that you know that, I talk about the Buddha jhana that I have introduced in chapter 7. Namely, the state of the coming together of various past factors, where there is pretty much no self anymore. And only you can know what method is appropriate for you right now, because only you know your own weaknesses that you should work on. So you should identify that weakness, which requires self-honesty, which we have learned in chapter 4. And when you did that, then you can choose an appropriate method to overcome that specific problem of yours. And the Buddha also discussed the part on when to do what in, for example, this sutta from the Book of the Nines, number 1. And he said, the monk should develop further another 4 things. The perception of unattractiveness should be developed to abandon lust, very specific thing. Metta should be developed to abandon ill will, again, a very specific thing for a specific problem. Mindfulness of breathing should be developed to cut off thoughts. But this is a very advanced thing, so you should make sure that you have the foundation for that. And the perception of impermanence should be developed to eradicate the conceit I am. And when one perceives impermanence, the perception of non-self stabilizes. One who perceives non-self eradicates the conceit I am, which is nibbana in this very life. Living, experiencing without the conceit I am. Again, this should make very clear what the Buddha talked about. It is the self that must be removed from all sankharas. It is not consciousness that vanishes. It is consciousness as you know it. The Putujana's idea of consciousness ceases completely, but the aggregate of consciousness remains there, which is very important. But as you can see in this short sutta snippet, the Buddha advised us to use specific things, to use specific perceptions as an example, or methods to overcome specific problems. And that is exactly what we should do. So in that regard, this is a way in which you could employ certain methods. But it's not really fitting to call, for example, the perception of impermanence a method, or the cultivation of metta, because there is no recipe that you can follow. You must really look into your own experience, look what is there, identify ill will when it is there, be self-honest enough to acknowledge it, and then work and overcome it. So you could call that a method, but it's a very recipe-like method, and people nowadays always want cookbook-style recipes, but you cannot give those, because every practitioner is a bit different, and you cannot apply the same recipe to every practitioner, which is very important. And now to a slide on when to switch methods. And this is very important, because it is freakishly easy to stick with one method for too long, because it generates nice feelings for you. And when you do that, then you are moving with the grain of the world and are not profiting properly. So the first sign is when you get too comfortable, or when you start using meditation as a cope, when there is no more difficulty, or when you cling to your method. All those things pretty much point at the very same thing, namely that the meditation became too pleasant. There is no challenge anymore. And when there is no challenge, there is nothing to grow. And when there is nothing to grow, there's no progress. Then you are pretty much just sitting there, enjoying yourself and meditating with your sensuality. And it's very important to notice that sensuality is not just sense objects in the world. It is always the attitude of getting something, of wanting something. That is what sensuality is. When there is craving, it is sensuality. And when you are non-reactive enough, it is also a good idea to switch to something else. And when it does not produce results anymore, when nothing changes when it comes to the perception of non-self as an example, then you should also switch methods. And when you are ready for more, because you fulfill the prior conditions for more, then you should also switch your method and do something else instead. And again, methods are stepping stones. Never, ever confuse them for more. When in question, you want to go where there is resistance. And you might even, in some cases, create some discomfort artificially for you, so that the mind has some immediate problem that it has to solve to make additional progress. And good meditations are not necessarily good feeling meditations. And this is something that most beginners have a lot of trouble understanding with. Beginners always seek for good feelings. This is completely normal. This is the state of a practitioner. He wants good feelings because he associates good feelings with freedom from suffering. But that is not what freedom from suffering is. Freedom from suffering begins when even good feelings or neutral feelings or bad feelings cannot touch you anymore, when you have gone beyond feelings. And beginners overall rarely have peace in their meditations, at least if they do them rightly. Typical meditations can be frustrating, confusing, distracting. There can be a lot of doubt, and all of the 5 hindrances can be quite strong at the beginning, and you gradually weaken them. And you go from gross to very subtle enduring, as an example. In the beginning, the defilement of the mind will be very, very gross. There will be, violence fantasies, sexual fantasies, and all kinds of very, very gross distractions that you move more and more into the background by not welcoming them, entertaining them, etc. And the initial enduring is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Otherwise, you cannot cultivate virtue, and it leads to progress. So as long as there is something to endure, you are making progress, even if it does not feel very good. And good meditations teach you understanding. They teach you something about yourself. You learn something about your mind, about phenomena, about the Dhamma. Those are good meditations, not the good feeling ones. The good feeling ones are good feeling meditations. But good feeling is not good. Good in the sense of leading to liberation. And overall, no linear results are generally possible. You have to repeat what you do in meditation a lot without seeing immediate results. This is why it is so hard. Because there is no direct temporal correlation between the effort you put in and the results you get, which is why Dhamma is pretty much impossible to do without the instructions in the face and another. And the good signs of progress are as follows. You could ask yourself the following questions and answer honestly, and then you can find out if you are making progress. For example, how irritable are you by random things or events, like toe stubbings, loud neighbors, barking dogs, bad news at work, or things like that. If you are less reactive and are generally just fine with how things are, then chances are good that you are making progress. Or what is your default response to criticism? Again, criticism is something that hits deep for people. We do not like to acknowledge our own mistakes. And any defensive response or agitation when confronted with an opposing view is always rooted in craving. So when you have no problem with other people criticizing you or attacking your views, then again, that is a good sign of progress. Or how do you behave in everyday life? Do you cope a lot? Do you engage in instant gratification a lot? Or do you enjoy seclusion? Do you feel less need to engage in sensuality? If the answer is yes, then you are probably on a good way. But that does not mean that you are there yet. Just based on all that I present here, does not mean that you have attained the right view. And the attainment of the right view should be the #1 priority for any spiritual practitioner. Or how do you react to bad meditations, where you simply cannot concentrate? Because the true nature of suffering surfaces when we are facing difficulty, and not when things are easy. Everyone is at ease when things are easy and when there are good feelings. But not everyone is at ease when there are bad feelings. So this is your metric. This is your measure of progress. Or when you, for example, think about tragic events, what is your default reaction of mind? It could be the own death, sickness, never having sex again, never tasting something nice again, or things like that. And when the default answer of the mind is that it does not really mind, then chances are good that you are making progress. And lastly, and this is a very important one, is craving still arising? You should ask yourself over and over and look very honestly in your own experience how much craving there is. And do you even know what craving is? All those questions are very important, and you should keep them in mind and reflect gradually and repeatedly on those things to make sure that you are moving in the right direction. Because in the end, all that matters is the perception of non-self, pretty much, your samadhi. When your samadhi is getting better, then you are obviously creating the causes and conditions for more samadhi to arise, which is what you should do, because it culminates in nibbana. First in jhana, and then at some point in nibbana, complete liberation of mind. And now we come to contemplations, and those are much more in line with what the Buddha actually taught. This is a short repetition from chapter 6, where we discussed a lot about the right view, the attaining of stream entry, the understanding of dependent origination. And this one slide just summarizes again the principle of dependent origination in the typical 12 links that the Buddha laid out. And I will just repeat the gist of the entire chain of dependent origination here. The Buddha simply observed that specific parts of our experience depend on the simultaneous presence of specific other parts of our experience. For example, suffering can only be there when there is simultaneously craving present. And craving can only be present when we simultaneously ignore the 3 marks in our experience. So when we, for example, notice that the 3 marks are there, then we can no longer really crave, because we notice, oh, those things happen on their own. They change on their own, and we cannot really control them. And when we cannot really control them, we grow dispassionate towards them, and the result is always the same, namely that the perception of non-self becomes established in us. So when we try to see dependent origination and the right view, we must always take one thing in our experience that appears to be under our control, under our mastery, under our ownership, and then we must notice that it is fully dependent on something that is outside of our control. When we do that, then by indirection, we will remove the wrong assumption of self, and the result is a perception of non-self. It immediately becomes non-self, what was self before. The sense of self is still there, but it is now non-self. And the pairs that you use for contemplations are pretty arbitrary. You can use any of the 2 elements here. You can use suffering, which is very much yours, and see how it depends on your feelings, or on contact with yourself, or how it could not be there without name and form, or anything like that. Very important to keep in mind. It is a principle of dependent origination. You do not have to repeat the entire chain every time. You just have to understand the relationship between 2 elements. Okay, but now we come to the contemplation of anicca rightly, which is pretty much what I just described. The goal is to gain insight into dependent origination. And as anicca precedes logic, it is a suitable thing to do or to perceive when we try to overcome something that is so deep-rooted and based on logic. We need something that is more significant than logic to uproot a wrong view. And this is pretty much always necessary to uproot any wrong view. And it's very hard to get the first glimpse of it, because the mind kind of fights the perception of impermanence, because it would mean the extreme weakening or even uprooting of the self view. And we can use it as a tool to remove unknown implicit assumptions that you are affected by and completely convinced of. And those things cannot be removed by logic. It is impossible. And you really want to try to integrate everything into the context of things that are already there, that are already happening, and you just find them there in the world. And you have to try and see anicca directly when there is neither a good nor a bad feeling. So otherwise you would misconceive it. And again, you have to do that over and over again until it will someday click, which is very important to keep in mind. And here is another exercise that I really like to use to show you how important it is to apply the perception of anicca or of impermanence to where you have cravings, to where you have the sense of ownership. You don't have to apply it to some impersonal stuff like mountains erode or it's raining or the coastline changes or anything like that. You have to apply it where you have a sense of ownership. This is what you must do. Anicca is deeply personal, and you can do the exercise here. First the first block, then a short pause of contemplation on your side, and then the second block. Again, imagine being a prisoner to be executed in the very near future. Before the dreaded day, you can voice one last wish and enjoy whatever pleasure you want. You could ask for whatever you desire, except for the things that delay the inevitable. Would you be able to enjoy your last meal, your last movie, your last prostitute, or whatever you would wish for? You can think about that for a moment. Would you, when faced with impermanence of your life, be able, which is very personal by the way, be able to enjoy sensuality? Yeah, I assume you are done now, and the answer is very likely no. Only one thing would be on your mind, your imminent execution. The only reason we can mindlessly enjoy sensual pleasures is the fact that we ignore our own impermanence, the impermanence of the pleasures and all those things. Only by ignorance of the three marks are we able to enjoy sensuality and get infatuated with it, which is very important to keep in mind. Thus, cultivating the perception of impermanence cultivates the dispassion towards all things in the world, and as a result, we become liberated in our mind. And there are many different ways we can go about things. We can, for example, use disgust as a vehicle to overcome the self-view, as we only really try to own or make ourselves what is agreeable. We ignore painful or unpleasant aspects of our experience. And the very simple scenario you can imagine when it comes to that, to really see what I mean, is hairs and nails. They are beautiful, usually, when they are well groomed and on our body. But as soon as you find a nail clipping on the floor, it is more or less disgusting, even though nothing has really changed about the nail. The nail is still the same as before, but our perception of it has changed. Now it is on the floor, and it's not the same anymore. And contemplating impurities of the body, as an example, weakens our ownership of the body. And the same applies to the stages of decomposition of corpses. They all work based on the same principle pretty much. You notice that the body is nothing that is worth clinging to, as an example, and as a result, you can be liberated from the body. But again, it is very important to see the repulsive or the ugly within the beautiful and not instead of. Because you can just jump to the other extreme and start liking all those disgusting things. It happened to monks all the time. They became attracted to corpses and such things if they overdid it. And you should also be careful when contemplating death or such things, by the way. Because it can be too much for you. It always should happen on a gradual basis. You should only do things when you are ready for it. Some monks even committed suicide when contemplating the repulsiveness of the body. This is why the Buddha introduced mindfulness of breathing as an alternative to mindfulness of impurities or such things. Because people at that time did sometimes commit suicide because they were too disgusted with their bodies. Well, yes, the ownership did fade, but they did jump to the other extreme. And instead of becoming dispassionate towards the body, they became, they wanted to get rid of it, which is not a good thing. And then we have the actual mindfulness of death, which is another antidote to sensuality, as we have seen in the Samvega, in the prisoner exercise that we just did. It is the quickest and sharpest way to liberation, as it completely devalues sensuality. When you are facing the prospect of imminent death, then sensuality loses all meaning to you. Because now you know that there is impermanence involved. That what you deemed permanent before, is in fact impermanent. But the contemplation of that can have severe possible side effects, bordering suicide or madness. And monks often went mad, because it makes everything that you have deemed valuable before completely meaningless. This will happen to all of us, by the way, when we grow old. Mindfulness of death or contemplation of death just makes that problem that usually lies very much in the future very imminent. It pulls it into the present moment, and it makes it a problem of vital concern. And we can only really indulge in sensuality based on the wrong assumption of immortality. And everything becomes secondary to the perception of our own impermanence. And death is the ultimate context of life. So when you practice mindfulness rightly, it can happen that you become an arahant in 2 weeks. It's not rare to do that, but it can also happen that you just go mad and stop practicing Dhamma altogether, because it is too much to handle for you. So it should be done very carefully if you choose to do it. And for most people, mindfulness of breathing is much better, but has the same result ultimately. You will, through mindfulness of breathing, also realize the impermanence of your life. It's just more gradual and thus better to handle for most people. And then we have the element contemplations and the kasina contemplations, which can also be very helpful. What we do here is we categorize the entirety of parts of our experience that other parts of our experience depend upon. For example, form, the material aspect of our experience, is a condition for other aspects of our experience. And that material aspect, that form aspect of our experience, consists of certain parts, namely the earth part, the water part, the fire part, the wind part, and space and consciousness too, in a sense. And when we see that we cannot own either of those building blocks of the form part that we feel like owning, then we will see, we cannot own that at all. or that is a possibility that we realize that through such contemplations. And in a very similar way, we can use the kasinas as objects of contemplation and notice that our entirety of our visual experience, for example, is based on just color and light, pretty much. And when it is just color and light, it is very clear that we cannot own any of that, and as a result, we become dispassionate towards it. And there will be the perception of anicca and then the perception of non-self. This is the idea. It is not that we get absorbed in colored discs. It is very much an object of contemplation that tries to put dependent origination into practice so that you can actually see it, to cultivate the right view, and pretty much start your path towards final liberation of mind. And all of this can be applied in many different ways. For example, to the sixth sense basis, where you notice that all perceptions that you can possibly have must arise through the six senses that you cannot control. The eye sees whatever it wishes. And when you notice that, you will become disenchanted, and all possible experiences are pretty much included in that contemplation of impermanence, because all possible experiences arises through the senses. And if you need more contemplation topics, you could, for example, look at Majjhima Nikaya 77 or the Sutta Nipata Sutta that I have linked in chapter 6 that lists all the possible pairs of contemplation to understand dependent origination. And lastly, you can do a lot of self-interrogation, which again is very important and very fruitful. But as it is self-interrogation, if you have no other person who has understood the Dhamma near you, you must have a lot of self-honesty. Otherwise, it will not work. And what you could do is contemplate the meaning of words. Have I really understood what certain things are? Do I understand what craving is in my experience? Or do I just think that I understand that? Do I know what feelings are? Well, if you would understand that, then you would be an arahant. So there must be something missing. So feeling, what is feeling? This is a good contemplation. So this is something the monks and the suttas did very often. They tried to understand certain words. And once they understood them, they became, for example, able to dwell in the first jhana, if they have contemplated the first jhana like that. And understanding those words means that you have a lot more power over those states. Let's put it like that. And another possible contemplation is, am I really free from the arising of craving, or do I try to manage craving? And many, many more. There are a lot of things that you can do. And it's a good idea to rightly ponder and think a lot, but do not intellectualize. It is very important to do that. Insight can only be gained based on the entire experience as it is right now. It has to be done on the basis of your experience as a whole. It is a recognized experience. It is not an intellectual thinking. The Buddha always distinguished between knowing and seeing. Knowing and seeing means on the basis of your experience as it is right now, and not just logically pondering things. This is very important. And now we come to a few other supportive practices, because the meditative practice also has a very mundane aspect. And the first thing is that you should cultivate health and mental health. Spirituality has a mundane part too, and the mind has to be neither too depressed nor too elated or fit to win the battle with the king of the underworld, Yama, as the Buddha sometimes phrased it. And you should, for example, seek therapy when you are facing problems that are too harsh for you to deal with. You should make sure that your sleep is good, because it is essential. If you sleep too little, you will be not fit for striving. Your nutrition should be good. It is essential, because otherwise your health will deteriorate over time, and then concentration or samadhi will be impossible. It is very, very difficult to progress on the Buddhist path when you are sick. And one of the best examples is Nanaviratera, who had a chronic illness and in the end committed suicide, because his body was completely unfit for striving. And it's not a good idea to cultivate such a body. You should really take care of yourself and make sure that both your health and your mental health are on point. Neither too depressed nor too elated. And people with certain mental illnesses should not meditate, by the way, and rather focus on the cultivation of virtue alone. There is a list of diseases that you can look up for yourself if you are fearful, if you are part of that group, that you should avoid. For example, if there is a disease that makes you delusional, then you should not meditate. Then you should just cultivate virtue, sila, do dana and all those good things. But meditation is probably beyond you in this life. This can happen, by the way. And then what is also important and directly relates to health is exercising and eating in moderation. We do have evolutionary duties, and some things have to be done. And this includes things like breathing, sleeping, eating, shelter, drinking, and medicine. We should take care of those aspects. The Buddha advised us to do that too. And this also includes exercise. We get sick when we don't move. And we can't digest our food when we don't move. And the Buddha prescribed walking meditation for those very facts. And overconsumption should also be avoided, as it leads to all kinds of metabolic problems. The Buddha did in fact urge his followers to eat in moderation and only for the sustenance of the body. And he criticized monks that ate as much as they liked and then laid flat on their back and just enjoyed their food very much. He criticized them. He did not praise them. Moderation in eating is something that we should practice, as we have to eat. And the last part is probably celibacy, and it's very, very likely the most unpopular part. You should practice at least temporary abstinence from sexual activity, which includes all kinds of pornographic materials and masturbation and all thoughts relating that. It is very beneficial because the sexual drive is the strongest in humans, second only to survival. And the Buddha said, for example, that the form of a female body is the most enchanting thing for a man, and the thought or the image of a male body is the most enchanting thing, the most craving-inducing thing for a woman. So we should really be very careful, because that is where the very deep-rooted biological craving happens. And for many people, it is a very scary idea to renounce sexuality, because they derive a lot of their pleasure from sexuality. And the Buddha did call non-celibacy a thorn in the holy life. That does not mean that it is completely impossible to attain the right view or any of the other stages of awakening while you are sexually active, but you make it way harder on yourself, especially when you are still addicted to sexuality, when you have seen the danger in it, the danger in craving and all those things, and just continue doing it out of weakness, then that is another thing. But if you deeply value it, that is a serious hindrance, let's put it like that. And monks and nuns even had very special rules when it comes to sexuality, as obsession with sex makes insight very impossible. And things like the Uposatha, for example, help, where you try to stick to the 8 precepts for a limited amount of time. So there are days in your life where you feel the pressure of your addictions, where you force yourself to feel the pressure of your addictions. And when those days are very hard for you, then you see that you are very deep down the sensuality rabbit hole and maybe should make changes to your life. And long no-fap streaks, for example, are good. It removes the complete reliance on sexuality as a cope. And right view is possible without full celibacy, but you can become negligent again if you attain the right view. So there is some celibacy that is very likely necessary. So sensuality and sexuality must be devalued before you attain the right view pretty much. But you can become negligent again when you have to value that and then go back to sensuality. And a lot of people in the Suttas did that. But some celibacy is very much necessary, let's put it like that, even though it is very unpopular. You should at least limit your consumption of pornography. And many people nowadays are addicted to that, as an example. So it's not just intercourse with partners, it also includes everything that is related to masturbation and pornography. Again, very important. The distinguishing mark is always the craving. When there is craving, is a bad thing for liberation. This is very important to keep in mind. And now we come to one of the last very important slides, namely ordering all the things that we did on a timeline. When it comes to methods, each thing should be performed at a certain level of progress. And this is just a very rough sorting to give you an idea. And it's pretty much based on Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Seventh, number 68, where the Buddha states that there is a right time for certain things. There is a right time for discussion, for contemplation, and for all the other things. And yeah, you should make sure that you choose the right time for all things. For example, in the beginning, you should cultivate a mode of being that is very beneficial for practice. You should have self-honesty. Because without self-honesty, you will not even acknowledge your problems. You should do basic self-improvement. If you need it, you should seek therapy. You should cultivate beneficial daily and healthy habits, like moderation in eating, some exercise, and all those things. And you should really keep the 5 precepts and maybe make a daily habit out of meditation. Those are the things that a beginner should focus on. For a beginner, jhana is completely uninteresting because he cannot really attain it. Any state that he will attain will be attained through craving. And this will not be the real jhana that the Buddha was talking about. And then based on that, you can seek some beneficial people, some sanghas, for example, do some metta meditations, some guided metta meditations as an example, study a lot of books, and do a few body scans to try and be able to identify certain parts of your experience, certain parts of the body. You can also do some labeling and noting to also learn to know your mind better and all the mental phenomena that are available. Because most people are completely unable to tell what a feeling, for example, is, what consciousness is. They cannot isolate that in their experience, but you have to be able to do that if you want to understand your experience. You must know what all those things are. What is a mood? What is consciousness? All those words must be understood on that level. And then based on that, you can start to actually be mindful and start reading the suttas, maybe doing some walking meditation, some contemplation while doing the walking, and really start to strengthen your mindfulness and make it more and more right based on the descriptions in the suttas. Then based on that, when you become more and more advanced, you can contemplate more and more and really start to discern the three marks, and first and foremost, of course, anicca. And then you can also move into seclusion, and at some point you will become a noble one and gain insight and don't need any methods anymore. And from that moment onwards, mindfulness will become effortless because you notice it is already there. So you don't have to do it, and when you don't have to do it, it is effortless. So then there is a stream entry, and based on that you can have right samadhi, right jhana, and all those right things. And from then on, the Dhamma pretty much begins. The path begins there. Everything before that is prior training, let's put it like that, which is also very important, but it's not yet the Dhamma. Thus, all your efforts should be channeled towards attaining the right view, attaining stream entry, towards understanding dependent origination. Because without dependent origination, there is no vision of Dhamma, there is no Dhamma, there is no path. The path begins with stream entry. Very important to keep in mind. Okay, but let us now come to the most important points of chapter 9. And first, as Dhamma is about doing wrong understanding, many methods can work to a degree, but oftentimes it is working as a despite versus because of. Some methods do something right, but other things very not right. And it is very easy to misdiagnose your progress based on a method that just gave you something based on carryover. Then you think there is some magic involved with that method, but in reality, it just fixed some missing piece of the puzzle for you. So you should be very careful when practicing methods. They can be done to overcome very specific problems of yours, but you should do them, you should reflect frequently if the method is doing you any good. And any sufficiently boring practice can be a foundation for insight. Most methods are not special in that regard. They do not generate insight in themselves. They just give you the opportunity to contemplate and think in the background, and thus notice that the foreground might depend on certain things in the background, very isolated, and then you can gain insight based on that. And meditation methods are usually replacements for virtue or to generate calm or fix some other weakness of yours. They need very specific environments, especially as a beginner, so you are temporarily secluded from all the things that typically grab your attention. And they provide some benefits, but at the cost of frequent side effects overall. Methods can make you attached to them. If they generate pleasure for you, then it's very likely that you will develop craving towards that pleasure. And that is a very bad thing, as it strengthens the overall process of craving that you want to weaken. And that requires restraint and enduring, even when it comes to your favorite method that makes you feel very good. That feeling very good is not what jhana and insight is all about. Jhana and insight goes beyond feeling. And true understanding arises through contemplation and trying to understand. Methods alone are not enough, and I cannot overemphasize it. Use them for your specific weaknesses, but know their limitations. And spirituality works overall best on a foundation of a healthy lifestyle, some self-improvement, good habits, good mental health, and all those things. You should in fact never ignore your worldly needs. You should be healthy. You should be somewhat fit for striving. All those things must be there. They are the foundation of the holy life, that and virtue. And then you can try to understand based on those things. Okay, but let us now come to the meditation of the day. This time around, it is a sense restraint meditation, where you just sit in meditation and restrain your senses and do not do what you usually want to do and endure the bad feelings that arise through it. You can scan the QR code if you wish, and this style of practice is very beneficial, but it can be one of the hardest things that you can do. But anyway, now to some questions and answers. So if there is anything unclear concerning methods and contemplations or anything very practical when it comes to the practice, feel free to ask down in a comment below so that I can gather your questions and answer them in a Q&A video at the end of the lecture. I will obviously also answer very immediately, but I will also make a video out of it so that more people can benefit from it. But anyway, let us now continue with the contact slide. Again, if you want to support me, you can do so on Patreon if you wish. If you want to join the Dhamma Hub Discord, again, you can do that by scanning the middle link. And if you want to find books on Amazon, feel free to do so. If you feel like you could benefit from this lecture, feel free to share it with other people that you know of as interested in the Dhamma. And yeah, apart from that, thank you very much for watching and for making it till the end. And have a nice day and goodbye, maybe until next time.